Okay, boys and girls, what chapter?
2.
And what page?
23.
What's the book?
My brother Sam said.
And how do we leave it? What happened to Sam at the end of the first chapter? Abby.
Him and his dad were arguing, and at the end of the chapter, Sam's dad was crying, and then Sam was kicked out of the house.
Who kicked him out of the house?
His dad.
Well, who has a difference of opinion in this chapter? What is the tension that's going on in the first chapter?
That is Sam's fault.
Dylan.
Sam's father doesn't agree that Sam should go to war. He thinks that they should all just obey the king.
Very good. They all should obey the king. Okay. My father's name was Eliphalet, but everybody called him Life. My mother's name was Susanna. Father was born in Reading, where we have our tavern, but mother was born over in New York. He had cousins over there where she used to live. Their names were Platt, which used to be my mother's name. I'd never met them, but when Father went over to Verplanks Point every year to sell cattle and buy supplies, he stayed with them and he caught up on the news. Reading wasn't much of a town compared with places like New Haven, although actually I'd never been to New Haven. About the only big place I'd ever been was Fairfield, down on Long Island Sound, where I used to go sometimes with Father and Sam to pick up sugar or rum that came up from Barbados in big ships. There were thousands of people in Fairfield. At least it seemed like that. But there were only a few hundred in Reading. Reading was divided into two parts, Reading Center and Reading Ridge, which was where we lived. Our tavern was at the corner where the Danbury-Fairfield Road met Cross Highway. Across the Danbury-Fairfield Road from us was the church and the graveyard. Next to the church, on the other side of Cross Highway, was an empty field where the train band practiced drilling. Next door to us was Bet's house, and scattered around were a dozen or more houses, the Sanford's house, and the Rogers house, and Mr. Heron's house, and some others. Our tavern was finished with shingles, but some of the other richer people, like Mr. Heron, he had white clapboard siding on their house. Now, boys and girls, one of our things to do for the questions will be to draw the scene they just depicted in that paragraph to help you visualize the town. So you'll reflect back to page 24. Our church in Reading Ridge was an Anglican church. Anglican meant English church. In England, everybody had to belong to it. So do you see how they told you which religion you would belong to? Or at least that they were supposed to. In Connecticut, we had freedom of religion, so you could belong to any church you wanted, unless you were a papist. But there were hardly any of them in Connecticut. And what's a papist?
Catholic.
Catholic, good. Over at Reading Center, there was a Presbyterian church. Naturally, if you were Presbyterian, you built your house over there. And if you were Anglican, you built your house here on the ridge. Although, of course, there were lots of farmers all around who didn't live near either church and just went to the one they wanted. Because our church was the English church, the people here on the ridge seemed to be more on the Tory side and wanted to be loyal to the king. To tell you the truth, I didn't exactly understand what the argument was all about. Ever since I could remember, all of my life in fact, there had been these discussions and arguments and debates about whether we ought to obey His Majesty's government or whether we should rebel. What kept confusing me about it all was that the argument didn't have two sides the way an argument should. It had about 6 sides. Some people said that the king was the king, and that was that, and we ought to do what he said. Other people said that men were supposed to be free to govern themselves, and we should rebel and drive the lobsterbacks out altogether. Some others said Well, they were born Englishmen, and they wanted to die Englishmen, but that the colonists ought to have more to say in their own government, and that maybe we'd have to give the lobsterbacks a taste of blood just to show the king that we meant business. People had all kinds of ideas that we were New Englanders ought to join together, or that all the colonies ought to set up one big government, or that, well, I don't know. I can't even remember all of the different sides that were in the argument. You can see how confusing it was when you realize that sometimes Sam was called patriots, sometimes they were called rebels. I guess I'd been reading newspaper stories about it and hearing people shout over the whole thing for so long, I really didn't listen anymore. It just kind of went in one ear and out the other. But now it seemed like it wasn't going to be just an argument anymore. Around 50 of the Minutemen and lots of the British troops had been killed on Friday at Lexington or Concord or wherever it was. Although nobody seemed to know how many for sure. And Sam was going to fight. Sunday morning was bright and sunny and warm. The rain had stopped during the night. Although the road was full of mud, the fields were drying and the birds were singing. I couldn't enjoy it very much, though. The fight Sam had with Father the night before still hung around me the way a bad dream does sometimes. Sam and Father had had fights before, and they always seemed to get over them in a day or two. But this one, it seemed worse than the others. And it worried me that maybe they wouldn't fix it up. I didn't think Father would want to talk about it. Usually when something important happened, he would just ignore it until he decided what to do. So I was surprised that he brought it up when we were getting ready to go to church. Tim, did Sam say anything to you about going to the war? I didn't want to lie to Father, but I didn't want to give Sam away either. Well, he said he was, but I thought he was probably just boasting. He wasn't boasting, Tim. He's going over to Wethersfield. The fools are planning to march up to Massachusetts to meddle in something that isn't their affair. Is he really going to fight, Father? I hope not. What do you think of all of this, Tim? I don't know, Father. I can't figure out exactly what it's about. I suppose Sam's been preaching rebellion to you. I tried to think of something that wouldn't get Sam in any more trouble. Oh, he said we ought to be free. Oh, that's just college boy wind, Father said, and he sounded pretty scornful. Who isn't free? Aren't we free? The whole argument is over a few taxes that hardly amount to anything for most people. What's the use of principles if you have to be dead to keep them? We're Englishmen, Timmy. Of course, there are injustices. There are always injustices. Now, that's the way of God's world. But you never get rid of injustices by fighting. Look at Europe. They've had one war after another for hundreds of years. And show me where anything ever got better for them. Well, let's go to church. It's time for prayer. I decided to forget about the whole thing. It was too worrying. We went out across the muddy road to church, and I climbed up into the balcony where the children, Indians, and black people sat. Redding Ridge being a small place, I knew everybody there, all of the kids and Tom Warrups and Ned and Star's black man. I sat down next to Jerry Sanford. Jerry was a couple years younger than me, but he was the person closest to my age around, and we did a lot of things together. And the first thing he said was, "We heard Sam ran away to fight." Nobody was going to let me forget about it. That was sure. Mr. Beach made it the subject of his sermon. He really got wound up on it, too. He said that our first duty was to God, but that our Lord Jesus Christ had said, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's." And that meant we were supposed to be loyal Englishmen. He said that hot-tempered young men who listened not only to the voices of their elders would bring a wrathy God down on their own heads. He said that the Bible commanded youth to honor their fathers, which made me pretty nervous for Sam, because it